Saturday is the birthday of Kim Il-sung. He is the founder of North Korea and an object of religious veneration. And if any day is likely to see some explosions, it is that one. It's already Saturday morning on the Korean Peninsula, so the test or a U.S. strike could conceivably come at any time. North Korea's military has issued a statement warning it would annihilate American troops in South Korea, quote, within minutes if it is attacked. It's hard to find anyone who really knows what's going on there inside the Hermit Kingdom, but Michael Malice is a top contender, if anyone is. He wrote a biography of Kim Jong Il, Kim Un-'s father, and the country's previous dictator. Michael Malice joins us tonight. Michael, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker.
So, from a non-expert point of view, this looks ominous, almost scary. Is it? Do we have reason to be really concerned?
We have absolute reason to be concerned. North Korea has been preparing for 70 years with the idea that the U.S. imperialists, how they refer to us, are going to come back and finish the job that we started in the Korean War. So this is part of their mythology. Children have to wait outside the library at night waiting for U.S. spies. So this is something they've been prepping for decades.
So we know that they are paranoid and warlike and they have an enormous military. What is their aim? What do they want?
The regime wants to hold on to power at any cost necessary. During the 90s, when the famine hit, the UN was expelled from North Korea because Kim Jong Il said if we have the UN feeding our people, they won't need the government, and up to 10% of the population starved. So when you look at Libya, if you look at Iraq, if you look at Slobodan Milosevic and Romania, when these regimes go down, the people at the top are personally killed. So Kim Jong-un has a very vested interest in maintaining his hold on power, even if he doesn't believe in the system anymore.
So wouldn't, and he does seem evil, but in some ways a rational actor. He's consolidated power as a very young man. Doesn't that suggest restraint? I mean, an attack on South Korea wouldn't help him, would it, or would it?
Well, it absolutely would not help him because, but at the same time, if his back's against the wall, he's going to go down fighting. His father, Kim Jong Il, got the supreme commander role, according to the mythology, because Kim Il-sung, the great leader, the founder, said, what do we do if we lose? And Kim Jong Il said, if we lose, we will destroy the world. And Kim Il-sung said, spoken like a true supreme commander. So part of their mythology is you have to live with the spirit of the bullet and the bomb and lay down your life on behalf of the leader. So these people are not going down without a fight. The Pyongyang metro is the deepest metro in the world because it's a bunker in case of a nuclear strike. A huge percentage of their infrastructure is subterranean. They have been waiting for years, and they're taught it in schools that we're going to come back and kill them all.
How do you think they'll react to feeling cornered, to the ultimatum laid down by the Trump administration?
I'm absolutely terrified because you remember President Trump during the campaign said, if someone hits you, you got to hit him back harder, and that's their exact mentality, and they have no allegiance to anyone. The scariest part is there are 100,000 to 200,000 people in concentration camps in North Korea right now. You can see the camps on Google Earth, and the people in these camps are told explicitly and constantly, if the U.S. imperialists invade, we will kill you all and burn these camps down. So if there's an attack, we might be looking at genocide within one day.
So we have a lot of American troops, of course, in South Korea, and the North Korean government has said, as we said in the intro, they will be killed immediately. Is that a plausible threat? Could they do that?
Absolutely. Seoul is the capital of South Korea.
Of course.
We divided the Koreas right directly north of Seoul after World War II. So for them to strike Seoul, which is 10 million people, with a nuclear weapon would be absolutely easy to do. And Kim Jong-il boasted that he turned North Korea into a hedgehog with spines in every direction, by which he meant missiles, and that a hedgehog can't be attacked by any larger animal. So this has been their idea for a very long time.
So the assumption, I think, of a lot of people in Washington is that China will prevent this from happening, that North Korea is a client state and it's not in the Chinese interest to allow this to happen. Is that true? Do they have control over the North Korean government?
No, China has been leaning on them and trying to get them to calm down for a very long time. And North Korea revels in the fact that they're a country the size of Pennsylvania, and they basically give the finger to China, Russia, Japan, the U.S. imperialists, and South Korea. So China can't really control them either. The only thing they've done is in the 70s, when they built a 70-story statue of Kim Il-sung in Pyongyang and plated in gold, China said, this isn't what communism is about, so they changed it to bronze. So Kim Jong-il said the Chinese system won't work here. We're Korean. Our systems are for us, and they call themselves a shrimp among whales, by which they love the fact that they're small, scrappy guys taking on the big boys.
Yeah, and they're legitimately tough. I mean, there's kind of no doubt about that. So finally, what's the right call at this point? I mean, obviously, the West doesn't want to see a hydrogen bomb in the possession of the North Korean government. That's what they're moving toward, apparently. How do you stop them from doing that without provoking a confrontation like this?
Anyone who says there's an easy, good answer here is not telling the truth. The Chinese don't want 24 million people who have never seen a computer, who don't speak Chinese, crossing the Tumen River and setting up camp in Manchuria. So it's a nightmare situation with no simple answer.
Is there any answer? How about a complex answer?
It's going to have to be some kind of Marshall Plan between China, Russia, Japan, South Korea, and us working together, and they're not going to relinquish their hold on power voluntarily.
Horrifying.
Yeah.
You didn't make me feel better, Michael, but I appreciate the information. That was really interesting.
Thanks, Tucker.
The Tom Woods Show, episode 892.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, if you're a musician, podcaster, or filmmaker, making your product sound great is crucial. Don't settle for audio that's less than professional. Hire Chris Williams Audio for all your podcasting, music production, and film audio needs. I use Chris for The Tom Woods Show. Couldn't live without him. Check out chriswilliamsaudio.com, and at checkout, enter Woods for 10% off your first contract. Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. With tensions on the rise with North Korea, Michael Malice is back on the show to help us understand what's going on and what the future is likely to hold. Michael, as you know, is a celebrity ghostwriter and a highly successful one, I might add. He is the author of Dear Reader, the unauthorized autobiography of Kim Jong Il, a book you will very much want to read, particularly these days. I'm linking to it at tomwoods.com/892. You can catch Michael frequently on Kennedy on the Fox Business Network and all over the place talking about North Korea. This week alone, he was on with Tucker Carlson, Neil Cavuto, and others. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Tom.
I've had people for a long time saying, when are you going to get Malice back on to talk about North Korea? Well, today is their lucky day. You are indeed back to talk about North Korea. Let's say a little something before we do about a little announcement you have pertaining to your book on this subject that I just told people about.
Dear Reader is now, you all been asking me, because apparently a lot of libertarians and freedom lovers and conservatives are illiterate. But yes, the book is finally out on audio. I did not do the narration because I do not think my voice would be appropriate. I'm extremely pleased with the audiobook. It's very true to how I wrote it. And that's the other thing that's really kind of creepy is when you write a book in the first person, you're kind of hearing the character in your head. So to hear it come out of my speakers, much as I had written it, was a very bizarre experience, I got to say. So yeah. I'm very pleased. Go to Audible, get it if you haven't got, and it's more pertinent than ever. So the reason I wrote the book, as you know, was so people could be informed by North Korea, because other than me, no one in the press seems to know what they're talking about, because it's hard to do your homework on the subject, to be fair, and it's very complicated, very idiosyncratic. It's not the same as Russia. It's not the same as Cuba. It's not the same as Syria or some of these other places, or Iran. It's its own unique animal. So I wrote this book so someone can read it and really have an understanding of how they think and how they operate. Because when you're talking about North Korea, it's like you're talking to Martians who are traveling in time, right? So not only is it alien thinking, it's also kind of anachronistic in many ways. So it's very hard to understand and empathize with their point of view, which is not to justify it, but you have to know your enemy if you're going to expect to see what they're going to do next.
Sure. So I urge people, check out this book, and particularly the audiobook version. As Michael says, you can get it on Audible. And in particular, Audible has a deal. If you're not yet a member, you get your first audiobook with them for free. And if you decide that you don't want to continue with Audible, they let you keep the audiobook for free. And even if you get the free audiobook, Michael still gets his royalties. So you don't have to feel guilty about it at all. And in fact, you
scared me for a second there.
Yeah, that's right. No, you are still getting your, believe me, I know, because I've been pushing people to get one of my books on audiobook, because I still get the royalty.
Okay.
But and then the Tom Woods Show gets a commission if you use tomwoodsaudio.com to grab Dear Reader. So we're all going to be, you're going to have a free book. I'm going to get a commission. Michael's going to be happy. We're all going to be happy, right? It's just fantastic. Even Audible will be somewhat happy.
Although I promise after you're done reading Dear Reader, you won't be happy, because North Korea is so much worse than people realize.
That is true. That's the one aspect of it that you won't be happy about. But check it out at tomwoodsaudio.com. Let's talk about current events, super current, like right here in the news.
Yes.
Up to now, what we know is that the North Korean regime is characterized by, wild statements and over-the-top statements, and generally the U.S. seems to have dealt with these things as diplomatically as possible, not to the point of opening relations and having talks, but, well, they understand. I mean, in other words, we haven't seen anything quite like what Trump has done.
Right.
And I want to know what you feel about this change. It's clearly a change in American policy to be that confrontational with North Korea.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a change in American policy in and of itself. It's a change in Chinese policy. Because the big issue with North Korea is North Korea and South Korea are divided by the DMZ, the ironically titled Demilitarized Zone, which is actually the most militarized border on Earth, complete with landmines, tunnels, and all sorts of other things. However, the border between North Korea and China, the Tumen River, is very easy to cross. And China doesn't want 24 million people who've never seen a computer, who don't speak Chinese, crossing that river and setting up camp in Manchuria. So for years, they've been the ones who, people think that China likes having North Korea there. And in one sense, they like having a buffer between, China and South Korea to be, as an anti-American thing. But they are trying to have prestige on the world stage. They're trying to be a rival superpower to the States. They don't need to be defending this kind of provocations and almost barbaric behavior and boorish behavior. So very clearly, when the Chinese president met with President Trump in Mar-a-Lago, this was the big issue on the table, and they must have had some very frank discussions. And I'm sure that's part of the reason why Trump went back on his pledge to brand them a currency manipulator. This might have been a tit for tat because they're clearly working together to finally resolve this issue. Thank God.
All right. So how do you feel about this then? You're in favor of the Trump posture?
I'm in favor of freeing the North Korean people. I mean, these are 24 million hostages. They've been hostages for 7 years. It's been getting worse and worse over the decades. I mean, the horror stories fill my book, and they continue. Thankfully, there's less and less faith in the government by the North Korean citizenry as they find out more about the outside world. And China was the last holdout, as I said, for earlier reasons. So it's not the Trump posturing is nothing new. I mean, President Bush put them on the axis of evil because he didn't want to have 3 Muslim countries on that axis. He just grabbed them at random.
But yeah, okay, but that's why, not because he was really paying them much heed, right?
Well, he was paying them much heed in the sense that he had read this book called The Aquarians of Pyongyang, which was the first Western expose of the concentration camp system on a large scale. And when he read it, it really shook him. And frankly, anyone who reads this book is going to be shaken by what it's like in these concentration camps, to be fair. However, the idea that they're somehow in cahoots or analogous to Iran or Iraq is nonsense. I mean, they do have relations with them in the sense of, like, we both hate America, but this is discussed in their propaganda in my book. The idea that it's an axis, which is like a mathematical, line, comparing 3 things, is nonsensical.
The stakes are pretty high here, though. I mean, nobody denies that it must be a horrifying nightmare to live in North Korea and live in these terrible conditions and live under that regime. Right. But the stakes are extraordinarily high. I mean, we're hearing things like nuclear war could break out at any moment. This is not a small thing. So nothing short of brinksmanship could be the solution?
Well, this is what's kind of scary to me in the press, where they're like, oh, can North Korea hit the U.S.? Can North Korea hit the U.S.? North Korea can easily hit Seoul, the capital of South Korea, which has 10 million people. Now, granted, if you want to be a complete sociopath, you'd say I'd rather hit Seoul than, Los Angeles. Fine, that's technically true. The idea that we want a mushroom cloud and 10 million bodies is that's the nightmare scenario, a nonsensical scenario, and they absolutely have that capability right now, and they've had it for years. So the problem is, if you look, first of all, as people in the anarchist school point out all the time, when these regimes give up their nuclear weapons programs, just like in Libya, the leaders themselves get personally killed. It's the last thing and it was the United States that introduced nuclear weapons to the Korean Peninsula in the 50s. We took them out in the 90s. So they have a point when they say, you guys started this, and this is us, in defense. However, now that they have them, I don't know what it would take to get them to give them up, because Kim Jong Il would probably be shot, and with good reason. These people should all be shot. I mean, I don't know if crimes against humanity is something that's a good legal term. It's kind of like the victor's justice, but these are murderers and monsters who starve children for political purposes.
What does South Korean opinion say about the current situation? Do they think Trump is over the top or what?
Well, South Korea has decreasingly been interested in North Korea. It's a very sad situation. So when North Korean refugees make their way to South Korea, and since you can't cross the DMZ, they have to go through China, make sure they're not caught in China because then they're repatriated. So they either go China to Mongolia and Mongolia to Seoul, or China to, and they go through the Southeast Asian countries. And everyone from North Korea who steps foot in South Korea or a South Korean embassy, which is considered South Korean soil, automatically becomes a citizen. But once they're there, their accent is regarded as, the word I heard used was guttural. And I asked a refugee, I'm like, what would be the American equivalent of a North Korean accent? And they said, someone from the very deep South. Now, you know how city slickers treat people from the deep South. They hear them talk, and they're contemptuous and dismissive completely unfairly. So South Korea has, I don't know if it's currently the case, but as of very recently, was the suicide capital of the world per capita, the plastic surgery capital of the world per capita. It's an extremely competitive society. And you have these people who have no education, who have nothing, who are short, and who have this kind of backwoods upbringing from the perspective of the South, and they're trying to make it there, and it's extremely hard for them. So every time you overturn a rock, looking at the North Korean situation, it's just more and more headache and misery.
All right, let me ask you about a couple things that have happened recently where we feel like maybe behind the headlines there's a little bit more going on. For example, there was the U.S. strike in Syria. You talked about that on Kennedy. You were absolutely great. We don't have to talk about it here.
Well, you can link to that in the show notes page.
I could, if you remind me. I certainly will.
Sure.
Michael was absolutely top-notch on this, as always. Did you see I linked to it on my social media, Facebook and Twitter? I put that video up.
Well, did you see you and Matt Welch both did? And I
that's
put a
right, on Twitter. That's right.
I'm the big tent of liberty. I'm bringing all the factions together.
It was a glorious moment. And then, of course, the so-called mother of all bombs dropped in Afghanistan.
Right.
So some people have suggested this was meant as a show of force, really for North Korea more than anything else. That's one thing. The second thing is we had this missile launch failure in North Korea.
Right.
And behind that headline, some people are saying maybe the U.S. somehow sabotaged that. In either or both of these cases, do you think that the headline should just be taken at face value, or is there really all this other stuff going on? There's
no question that President Trump knows a lot more about North Korea than the public knows. And frankly, that's how it should be, because North Korea is watching the news just as much as us. The other theory that hasn't been broadly promulgated, but which I'm partial to, is let's suppose you're North Korea and America's saying, if you have this test, we're going in. Well, if you back down, then it's going to be a show of weakness. But if you have the test, it's going to be an attack. What do? So you intentionally sabotage your launch as a public show of impotence, but also a show that you're not backing down. So they are very, very crafty, and I wouldn't put that past them. However, even if we did manage to sabotage them by hacking it somehow, that's also going to put fear into them, because that shows that we have kind of infiltrated them. And in a way that, it's kind of like how the NSA is in many ways spookier than the cops. The fact that someone is listening to me on the phone and I don't know that they're there is a very different sense of fear than someone, banging at your door. Because when someone's banging at your door, you can see the threat, you know what they are. Whereas someone listening on the phone, it's kind of like eerie. So that is something that's kind of very effective and it feeds into the paranoia in North Korea that is pervasive in that society, even at the very top. So that'll be very, very healthy and very, very useful. As for the first one, if that's the whole point about Syria and the mother of all bombs was to scare North Korea, that would be a brilliant move. If that is the consequence, as opposed to the harsh negatives that come with it.
Okay, this is all interesting stuff I hadn't thought of, but I think the idea that they might have, as a way of getting out of this impossible situation, sabotage their own launch would be hard to reconcile with the follow-up pledge to launch weekly. They're not going to sabotage a weekly launch.
Well, now they can be like, we're going to refuse to launch weekly once you start talking to us or accommodating us. So that is a threat. That hasn't actually come through yet. That's just them saying. They also threatened to blow up the world, They haven't done that.
No, they haven't. But on the other hand, it seems to me like, again, the stakes are so high. you really don't want to negotiate with somebody who could potentially do this, who could do all this unbelievable damage? We want to just take our chances that it's all a ruse?
We're not taking our chances, but first of all, there's a lot of ruses that they're masters of bluffing, and they boast in their propaganda that they're bluffing frequently, and that they can manipulate them. One example that they use is they compare themselves to an anthill and an elephant, meaning we know that the anthill can't kill the elephant, but it can certainly push him in the direction that they want. So this is explicitly their strategy, number one. Number two is, can you imagine the cost of launching a missile every week for a country that's that poor? It would be astronomical, and I think it would be absolutely absurd. There's no way that we're going to see a year of them launching missiles into the ocean. That's not going to happen.
All right, so how do you – let's put your prognosticator hat on. It's an unfair question, but how do you see this turning out?
There was a quote by either Hemingway or Steinbeck that said, how did you go bankrupt? And the answer was 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. So that is how this is going to go down. It's going to be some sort of overnight Romania Ceausescu situation or Soviet Union, where one day you have the regime and the next day they're gone. They can't really liberalize in incremental terms because the population has been so manipulated and fed lies. For example, their big foundation myth, right? Our foundation myth is that the founding fathers sat down, wrote some magic spells on a piece of paper, created the Constitution, and now it's this invisible entity that we all have to listen to. Their foundation myth is that the great leader Kim Il-sung, after the U.S. imperialists, that's how we refer to, started the Korean War, repelled the Yank Devils from the northern half of the republic. So when refugees learned that it was in fact Kim Il-sung who started the Korean War, it's been described as akin to learning that FDR bombed Japanese at Pearl Harbor. It totally blows your mind. So if they have any kind of liberalism where people have access to outside, and this has been 70 years of these lies, if they have any access to outside information, the general population, the resentment and rage and hatred they would feel would be terrifying to behold. And the regime would have extreme amounts of trouble keeping the people under control for the simple reason that it's not even one of these cases where they can have like a military junta and the military is paid off and healthy and happy at the people's expense. The military is hungry even. So the military would not have the loyalty to the regime in that situation. So it would go away. Something very radical would happen very quickly.
Well, I'm reading some text from an interview that Trump did on Fox and Friends just yesterday, and he's saying, I don't want to telegraph what I'm doing or what I'm thinking. We'll see what happens. I hope things work out well. I hope there's going to be peace. But, we've been talking with this gentleman for a long time. Everybody's been outplayed. They've all been outplayed by this gentleman, and we'll see what happens. And then they asked him, well, what if North Korea tested another missile? And Trump simply said, we'll find out.
Right.
All right. So he's not – whereas I do feel like under Obama – I did know what was going to happen. I think probably they were figuring we just bide our time with this guy. I think that more or less was their policy, right?
Yeah, North Korea wasn't a priority for Obama. And in his defense, it's such a hard nut to crack that I don't blame him for being like, I don't know what to do here, and I can't even begin to wrap my head around it, especially given the fact that most leftists are far more concerned with domestic policy and increasing the welfare state as opposed to kind of foreign adventurism, especially in recent years. So I mean, it's unfortunate that happened, but yeah, he was treading water for 8 years. I don't think there are any major developments vis-a-vis America and North Korea. And I think it's to Trump's great credit, frankly, that one of his first priorities was to sit down with the Chinese president and say, we're finally putting a stop to this. And somehow, or maybe it was China that kind of had the overtures, we don't know, but they were both like, all right, we're going to work together. And, this is the worst place on earth, and we're going to figure something out.
I have heard it speculated that it may in fact be the case that North Korea does not actually have nukes, that they say that the evidence shows that it just doesn't look like the strength is there to give us confidence that they actually have real nuclear weapons. What do you say to that?
I think that's kind of nonsensical. So when Kim Jong Il had his choice of successors, according to the North Korea 10 Commandments, they have a constitution, but that's for show purposes only. Their actual guiding document is the 10 Commandments of Kim Il-sung. The 10th commandment, which is, thou shalt continue the revolution through the generations until it's fulfilled, which means only a descendant of Kim Il-sung can be the leader. So Kim Jong-il had 3 male children, or quasi-acknowledged to choose from. The eldest was Kim Jong-nam, who was just recently killed in that airport by a surprise attack. Kim Jong-nam was passed over for the youngest son, Kim Jong-un, the current leader, because he told Kim Jong-il that he wants to denuclearize, that nuclear weapons are a big threat. And from Kim Jong-il's perspective, that's crazy because it was the nuclear weapons that was keeping North Korea in power, which was true. So Kim Jong-nam said publicly in interviews with Japanese reporters that they have nukes and that this is something that was a concern of his. So I don't see why he would have any reason to lie, especially because at that point he was already in Macau in seclusion, fearing for his life and being kind of an exile from North Korea, worrying that he was going to get killed any moment, correctly.
What would you do if you were in charge? If you were the U.S. president, what would you do?
I would do what Mises said he would do.
I know you would abdicate, but I'm talking about, let's just say that let's say Trump asked you, Michael Malice, what should I do?
No, in all seriousness, I mean, this sounds like an evasive answer, but it's not. I am so sure that you and I, let's say me, who has studied this issue extensively, I only know a tiny percentage of what's really going on there. Because, for example, when the Japanese Prime Minister Koizumi visited North Korea in 2002, the first Japanese prime minister to visit since World War II, to get that meeting set up, there were all sorts of meetings behind the scenes with people from North Korea who wouldn't even give their names. And they had to have all these things put into place, right? So China knows so much about what's going on there. The U.S. government knows so much about what's going on there. You and I, and the general population know so little. So the first thing I would do is I would have to sit down and say, okay, show me what you got. And second of all, I would just explain to him, like I did in my book, how these people think and how they operate. And I would point out the problems with each and every one of these possible scenarios. The biggest issue is, as I pointed out on Kennedy, you have 100,000 to 200,000 people in these camps who are told if the U.S. imperialists invade, we're going to kill you all and burn these camps down. Now, you might say that's a sunk cost and they're going to get killed regardless, but that's something that you have to consider. So and the fact is the population has been told that since the 50s, the Korean War was devastating to Korea. You had Russia and China in the north, you had the U.S. and the UN in the south, and Korea's in the middle, and they got kind of wiped out. And their point is, the U.S. imperialists are going to reinvade and kill you all as soon as we drop our guard, and they've just been biding their time. The only thing keeping them at bay is our Supreme Commander, Kim Jong-un. So if we start striking, they could be like, look, they're back. This is what we've been warning you about. And the entire population would be ready to take up arms and die for the sake of the leader like they've been taught to since children. And it wouldn't even be that crazy because we actually would be attacking.
So on the one hand, I think you feel like this regime is such a moral abomination that if you could do something to accelerate its demise, then that thing ought to be done.
Ought to is a big word. I would like to see it. If I had one wish, it would be that this regime vanished from the face of the earth. Literally one wish, that would be it.
Now, in this case, I'm not saying I necessarily advocate this, but this would be different from, let's say, somehow you were able to dislodge this regime. I wouldn't be as concerned about the after effect because it would basically be a CIA-approved stooge who would take over. And if I lived in North Korea, I would take the CIA stooge by a million miles
100%.
Over the current regime. So I'll take that.
100%.
Whereas in Syria,
right,
it would be, I know it's going to be somebody terrible and somebody who can't possibly be controlled, and it would be a nightmare for everybody involved. I know that for a fact. Right. I don't feel like that would really be the case here, right?
They just want food, homes, roads, and schools. They are the victims of the ideology. They're not proponents of the ideology. And I mean, look at South Korea. South Korea has the highest per capita income level of any place in Asia as of recently. They're not. South Korea and us sometimes have rivalries, and they might dislike some things America does, but they are hardcore allies. And North Korea would very quickly, even China. I mean, wouldn't you rather have like a mini China than another Syria? I mean, it's a very easy answer. And again, you have people who are fleeing North Korea into China, women who are being sold into sex slavery, and just all sorts of nightmarish stuff. So yeah, it would not be analogous to Syria whatsoever. You're not going to have North Koreans. The only North Koreans that engage in terrorism did so under the auspices of the regime. They did this repeatedly, and this is why North Korea was on the state-sponsored terrorism list. But now they're just hungry. They just want education. You know what I mean? This is a Maslow's hierarchy of needs issue. It's not some sort of, we want to rule the world issue.
Would you say that the regime is probably, one way or another, got to collapse of its own weight at some point?
The regime already collapsed in the 90s. In the 90s, the food distribution centers stopped working. However, since the government provides everything in North Korea, if you said, where's the food, you got in legal trouble because that's criticizing the government. Kim Jong Il, and I talk about this in my book, intentionally let up to over 1 million people starve to death because he said if we give them food not through the government, through the UN, they won't need the government anymore. So when the government is not capable of providing food, education, and infrastructure, the railway system broke down too because there was no gasoline, that is regime collapse. And they're still there. So when regimes collapse, it's not like they literally vanish from the face of the earth and turn to dust. But there was a complete breakdown of lawlessness and lawfulness. The sick part is those who believed in the government and were most loyal to the regime were the ones to starve first because they're like, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. It's the cynical ones who start to steal and to go to China and break the law and to do all sorts of, air quotes, illegal things to do what they need to survive that manage to live. So that's even more how twisted this country is, that they've rewarded loyalty by death via starvation.
Well, back here in the United States, we have a president who campaigned on a slogan of America First. And what we're seeing so far is he's now, if anything, more supportive of what Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen. We got the strike in Syria. We got NATO troops making their way into the Baltic states, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania. You've got calls by the U.S. commanding general in Afghanistan for more troops there. We got U.S. troops returning to Somalia, and we got saber rattling over North Korea.
Right.
This is a bit much.
Well, how great would it be if part of the deal with China is we liberate North Korea and then we get all of our troops out of Korea? Great. Love it. Wouldn't you love that?
I would love that. I would be okay. I would say that's a reasonable deal.
Yeah.
But yet the problem is it seems to me, anytime you speculate that behind the scenes there's some master plan going on, there never is. We're always overestimating the intelligence and abilities of our people in charge. It just seems to be always the case.
Sure.
Like for example, even if there would be some strategy like in the Ron Paul campaign that I just could not understand, I was always told, no, it's part of some big master plan. But couldn't it just be a bad decision by somebody? It was never that. It was always a big master plan. So with Trump, a lot of his diehard supporters are saying, now listen, Woods, don't you worry here. He knows what he's doing. He's got a master plan. But yet what it looks like to me kind of is something a little bit more prosaic at work, that he's surrounded by people who are influencing him in a bad direction, and he's moving in that direction.
I hear you, but my reason why I don't know that I'd agree is because I am fairly certain, and I think this is kind of indisputably true, that China has been thinking about the situation long and hard because it's right on their border, and that they probably came to Trump with a plan, and he probably edited a little or just greenlit it. So I don't think this is Trump's plan. I think this was China's plan.
Interesting. And do you think China is seeking some kind of a rapprochement with Trump, who spent half the campaign denouncing them?
Yeah, I mean, they've already gotten it. Right away, he's turning his back and calling them currency manipulators. He treated them, you saw how he spoke about them during the campaign. He treated the Chinese president very warmly at Mar-a-Lago. So they, by all accounts, got along famously. It wasn't tough. Don't you think that in all the footage and all the media reports, he came off much harder against Angela Merkel than against the Chinese president?
Yeah, no question about it.
And during the campaign, he spoke against China. There's even a little montage of him saying China. It was China, 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 China. He didn't like Germany's trade policy, migrant policy with good reason, but I don't think he took any swipes at Germany particularly or Angela Merkel. But you saw, they did shake hands earlier. That's kind of a mistaken thing. They shook hands at the press conference, but the body language and the tone and the look on her face, as opposed to the Chinese president, it was night and day.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. Well, I
And
guess
think about it. If he pulls off something with North Korea and ends this regime, this man deserves a peace prize every year for the rest of his life.
are you not concerned that if he does that, then that becomes the justification for every intervention from now until the end of time?
I have no concerns bigger than freeing the people of North Korea. And there's always going to be, look, Tom, you really think they're going to need to find some rationalization? There will always be a rationalization. Come on.
I don't know. I worry about this. They'll say, look, everything is just as easy as this. This was easy.
They will always say that anyway. They'll say that anyway, Tom. There's no way, and there's no way this is going to be easy, by the way. There's no way.
Well, I guess we just have to wait and see, right? This is not like my episodes on history where you say, okay, this happened and wasn't that interesting. Thanks for coming.
And while you're waiting, you can read Dear Reader.
Yes, that is now that's the way to wrap things up.
Yeah, and catch up and be where everyone else is and understand what's going on there.
So first of all, if you're an audiobook type, go to tomwoodsaudio.com and type in Dear Reader. Get that baby for free for yourself. If you are the old-fashioned type and you like to read it, have that thing in your hands physically, what is the best way to get the book?
Just on Amazon. It's on Kindle, and you could get the paperback as well. So
okay. I didn't know if you wanted us to go to your site or not.
No. Just we could go to the links in the show notes page.
Yep. Okay. TomWoods.com/892 will have a link to Michael's book, both the audio version and the print. And is there a Kindle version?
Yes, there is.
And the Kindle version. That'll all be there. And then also make sure and watch this clip from Michael on Kennedy. It's not just on Syria. It's on several topics. But this is why he's the best. He's the guy on TV that you want to watch. You can't if you're on your way out the door to go somewhere, you have to say, wait a minute, hold on, I'll be out in a minute when Michael's on.
And they cut my Casey Anthony joke. So.
Yeah, but I saw that on Twitter, right? Did you tweet that joke out?
Yeah, I did tweet that joke, yeah.
Was it because they just thought it was in poor taste?
They never tell me why they cut anything. I just get home and all of a sudden there's like a sudden pause in what I'm saying. I'm like, oh, darn it.
Oh, that's terrible. That was a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would it be... Do you think it's suitable for the Tom Woods Show, or would we have to put a mature marking on it, or what?
Well, let's ask the host. What does the host think?
Host thinks it's a funny joke, so if you're offended by it, then go jump in a lake.
Well, there was the head of Mother Jones Magazine, which is a far-left magazine, said that we shouldn't name Tomahawk missiles after Native Americans because it's offensive. And I said, well, we should name them Casey Anthony missiles because they are used to kill children.
Yeah, that's... That's a Michael Malice joke right there. Did you make that joke up?
Of course.
That is great. That is great.
Yeah, I'm glad you endorsed Casey Anthony humor, Tom.
Well,
how many kids do you have? 5?
Off the air, but the joke is implicitly against the killing of children, is it not? So
correct.
Right.
And she was found innocent.
Oh, yeah. There is that. Yeah. All right. Well, look, not wanting to invite any more of a lawsuit than I already have, I'm going to say it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Michael Malice. TomWoods.com/892 is the Michael Malice smorgasbord, where you can get the Dear Reader book in all sorts of varieties, and for your intellectual pleasure. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Tom.
If you're enjoying the show, please consider becoming part of the elite as a supporting listener at supportinglisteners.com, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
The Tom Woods Show, episode 570.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the show. We're talking about North Korea today in light of the news regarding the nuclear tests that took place there. Whether we were talking about the detonation of an H-bomb is in some dispute, but something happened, and we want to talk about what that means and what the response ought to be, how a libertarian ought to look at this type of situation in particular. Now, who else would we turn to than Michael Malice, right? There's nobody else we'd talk to than Michael Malice because, of course, Michael is the author of Dear Reader, the unauthorized autobiography of Kim Jong Il that is linked at the show notes page, tomwoods.com/570. You will enjoy that very much. It's an outstanding read because Michael's a great writer, and he is incredible at capturing the voices of the people for whom he writes. And of course, Michael, as you know, is a celebrity ghostwriter. He is a television commentator you will see frequently on Kennedy on Fox Business, as well as other programs on the Fox Business Network and Fox News. And you can find out more about Michael at michaelmalice.com. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Tom.
I think we better talk about North Korea.
Yeah.
You know, one of these principles of podcasting is they say, and I think rules are meant to be broken half the time, but they say, you've got to be rolling into the topic within 1 minute.
Oh.
And now, see, that sounds like the Soviet Union to me. What? Say what, comrade? I mean, 1 minute?
Right.
Are you kidding me? All right. Because I think I'm like grand total, you and me talking and my introduction, I think we're like 5 minutes in. But who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares? People are stuck in their cars. Where else are they going to go? Only to the other 8 zillion podcasts in the world. All right. This week, or actually now I don't know when it was, but it was relatively recently. Yeah. Last week. Yeah, last week. We read in the news of a nuclear test carried out by North Korea. There's some dispute about whether it was actually an H-bomb or not, but the point is it was a nuclear test, and apparently the 4th such test, and there is some unease about this, and the North Korean government says that it's doing this as a way of protecting itself against the imperialist Americans in case they should do anything to threaten the sovereignty of North Korea. So, all right, first of all, before I even give you any specific questions, what was your response to this, given that, as I just mentioned in the introduction, you did write Dear Reader about another North Korean leader. You do have some insight into the regime. How do you respond to this?
Well, I got to tell you, there's nothing that upsets me so much as watching people in the press who don't know anything about North Korea run their mouths. And it's very disconcerting for many reasons because, A, they're allowing North Korea to play them like a fiddle, and B, they're just speaking out of complete ignorance. And it's very dangerous because North Korea is doing this is a complicated issue, so let me break it down. And that's one of the reasons I wrote Dear Reader, is because everyone is pro-liberty vis-a-vis North Korea. I don't care where you are on the political spectrum. Everyone agrees that they need more social liberalism and economic liberalism. This is not a point of contention in political discourse nowadays. But what they do is this. So when they have these like saber rattling, which is really a best example, best term for it, that really distracts from, the horrors of the regime. And it's a very effective technique. It's like misdirection, just like magicians use. And the thing is, they gloat that this is their technique. So North Korea, when I was writing the book, when I went to North Korea and I got all the propaganda, and as you know, Tom, when I was writing Dear Reader, I read 60 books as background, including everything they have. And they openly talk about all their techniques. This is what was shocking to me. And there's a book that they have called A Duel of Reason Between Korea and the U.S. Okay, and this talks about the nuclear kind of conflict between them and us. And I'm just going to read this one paragraph. This is their writing, and they say Korea's U.S. strategy is to win the war without gunfire. A hot war, meaning military conflict, will result in the ruin of the Korean peninsula. So they know it. They know they can't win. Therefore, her strategy is, to all intents and purposes, to compel the United States to follow the way to peace by using her weapons and military forces as the cards to settle political and diplomatic disputes. So they are explicitly saying, look, we know America's stronger than us. We know America's bigger than us. But if we put on a big show, we can kind of bend you to our will. And that's exactly what happens. And here's a metaphor I always use when describing the regime and how they operate, because they have this impression, they give off this impression very intentionally that they're crazy, right? And I'm crazy and I can do anything. I'm capable of anything. Well, let's look at bank robbers. If I don't produce anything and North Korea produces nothing of value, how am I going to get food? The only way other than production, as you know, as all your listeners know, is through force or fraud, right? I have to steal from somebody else if I want to get food, if I'm not making any food. So there's two types of bank robbers if you're going to use force. One is the bank robber who goes into the bank and starts shooting up everybody and, getting their money. And then there's the other guy who goes in the bank and starts shooting at the air and, gets the money, gets out of there. Now, which would you rather be interacting with?
All right. So you're telling me, in other words, then, that we're getting all worked up about something that really is nothing other than political theater?
Correct. Because look, if you have that bank robber metaphor is perfectly appropriate, because when they fired a missile launch, and I think it was the 90s, they fired it into the Sea of Japan. They didn't fire it into Seoul. They didn't fire it into China or Tokyo. So they intentionally aimed it into the ocean. Doesn't that tell you that they are putting on a show for specific political reasons? And it works. And they laugh that it works every single time. And this is another quote from another one of their books, which was about the Sungun politics of Kim Jong Il. Sungun is Kim Jong Il's policy. Now people are familiar with the great leader Kim Il Sung, the founder of North Korea. His philosophy is called Juche, which meant self-reliance. Kim Jong Il refined that into Sungun, which means military first. Okay? And this is their words. Korean diplomacy is characterized by the fullest use of verbal power. The tone of her statements to the enemy sound high and intense, but if you read them carefully, you will find that preconditions are given without fail. In other words, if the preconditions are met, there will be a way out. Every time North Korea declares hostility, they always say something in the following way. This is horrible. We won't stand for this. No one disrespects North Korea. We're going to blow up the world unless you want to compensate us for this huge insult to our country and our character. So it's a ransom note, and they do this time and again, and the West falls for it constantly. Now, you could say that the West doesn't have a choice but to fall for it, but the idea that at any moment they're going to nuke Beijing or Seoul is absolutely insane.
Well, speaking of absolutely insane, when you wrote Dear Reader and you did all this reading, did you come to the conclusion that in his case, in the case of Kim Jong Il, that you were dealing with somebody who was somewhat unbalanced or somebody who was trying to project the image of being unbalanced?
If they're a suicidal country, how are they the last one standing? They must be really bad at being suicidal, right? If they're the last Stalinists. No, Kim Jong Il was very, Donald Trump recently, your friend, recently got into a lot of...
My friend?
Yeah, he's been tweeting about you.
That's right. He's been tweeting. If people didn't watch the Hamilton debate that you and I have, they won't get that reference. But if they didn't watch that debate, I can't call them my friend anymore, I think.
So he tweeted out that you got to give something to the effect of, you got to give Kim Jong-un credit. He did what is necessary to hold on to power. And all of a sudden, people in the press began to care about North Korea because this was their chance to get offended, and attack Trump. But the point he made is valid. Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung and now Kim Jong-un are ruthless, and they know exactly what it takes to stay in power. And we know that because they've been in power for 70 years. This is not an accident. So they have no regard for human life. So they're insane in that sense. They have no sense of moral sanity. But in terms of, being, rational actors and Machiavellians, they're the best. In fact, think what an accomplishment it was for Kim Jong-il in 1980 to be named the successor to his father, when communism was still conquering half the world, because the idea of a son inheriting the leadership position flies in the face of all communist principles. And even at the time, it was this shocking, moment. And yet they pulled it off. So they are very, very clever. They are very, very evil. And the idea that they're crazy is simply false, because the data does not support that in any way whatsoever. Now, a lot of what they say is crazy. A lot of what they teach their population is crazy. But frankly, the crazier the propaganda, the easier it is to spot people who aren't being obedient. Because if you could have an entire population smile and nod and tell you that Kim Il-sung can teleport and that Kim Il-sung can literally walk on water and can turn wood into bullets, you can very easily spot the people who have critical thought, and those are the dangerous ones, and those can be isolated or killed.
So the North Korean regime wants to influence U.S. policy, but what exactly does it want the U.S. to do? Does it want the U.S. to withdraw physically?
It wants money. All it wants is money. They're shakedown artists.
So they're not asking them to. They're not asking the U.S. to withdraw support for the South Korean regime.
They are, but I mean that's a secondary. I mean, this is one of their big points of contention. And something else that they say, which is not absurd, is, look, there's been only one country in history which has killed civilians using nuclear weapons. there's only one country in the world where the leaders, meaning the American presidents, go on TV and say things like all options are on the table, meaning we will nuke you if we feel it's appropriate. And they say, this isn't right. So there's something to that. However, and of course, they are very upset about the South Korean stuff. If you go to North Korea, every map has Korea as one country. They don't capitalize the N in North Korea or the S in South Korea because they say Korea is one country, indivisible, and the bottom half is a colony under the control of the U.S. imperialists, right? So they want, the Americans out of there. But, part of the reason they want the Americans out of there is they want reunification on their terms. So it's not it's a little from column A, a little from column B. Yes, they're upset, but they will find any excuse to be upset because that will give them an excuse to get angry, which forces people to give them money and food.
Well, on what grounds can they expect to get money? They've been nothing but hostile toward the U.S.
The same grounds a mugger gets money. That's exactly the grounds, and those grounds have worked. They say we'll close down this nuclear plant in exchange for food, and Clinton said okay. It works.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Gosh, I've forgotten about the Clinton years already.
George Bush was the one who took them off. They were officially designated as state-sponsored terrorism. George Bush was the one who took them off of that.
Ah, all right. Okay. So good grief.
Yes. So you see, that's how clever they are. When you look at all this, put the puzzle pieces together in a row, it's like, wait a minute, this is like a symphony. They're playing us like a fiddle.
All right. Tell me how China fits into this picture.
Okay, so this is actually, they've been playing other countries like a fiddle for 70 years. So North Korea refers to itself as a shrimp among whales, right? So during the communist era, ending in like 89, 91, what they would do is they would barter with both China and Russia under something that they called friendship prices, right? What that meant is China and Russia, or Soviet Union, excuse me, would send them, let's suppose, gasoline or things of great value. And in return, they would get terrible socks. And in terms of accounting, this was regarded as a wash. So China would get these socks that they threw in the garbage, but North Korea got gasoline or things of use. And this was their way of accepting effectively bribes from other countries. Come the end of the Soviet Union, no one wanted to give North Korea anything because they were serving no purpose. But China is the big issue here because there's the Tumen River is what separates North Korea from China. You have 24 million people in North Korea who've never even seen a computer. So who don't speak Chinese. Come the fall of the regime, those people are swarming over the border to China, and the Chinese don't want them there. So this is really the big sticking point. China is their last ally, but China is not a big fan of North Korea by any means. But they have no choice but to kind of make nice with them because of the physical proximity between the two nations.
All right. Now, I bet you've read more books on North Korea than most analysts of the subject. So how do you, based on what you've read, and in the news, for instance, about, let's say, American policymakers' commentary on the situation, what is your assessment of their understanding and handling of the situation?
Well, let me tell you what their assessment is. It's very funny. So Kim Jong Il, in one of the books, he gloats that in 1994, when the great leader Kim Il-sung died and Kim Jong Il took over, that all these and they mentioned Charles Krauthammer by name. That's the one that sticks out. How all these American idiots were saying the regime's going to collapse, and North Korea is going to implode, and that didn't happen. So they kind of love to thumb their nose like, oh, you thought we were going away. We're not going anywhere. So most analysts don't have a clue. Now here's the thing. North Korea did collapse. During the 90s when the famine hit and up to 10% of the population starved by choice, because the North Korean regime would not let food in because otherwise they would be regarded as superfluous, the government that is. That is a collapse of a society. When you don't have food distribution and you don't have any real kind of market in a broad sense of exchange or anything like that, that is a collapse. However, if you're willing to let 10% of your population starve to maintain your hold on power, it's going to take a lot to get you out of there.
All right, I know there's a lot of overlap between the Democrats and the Republicans in policymaking, domestic and foreign, but I'm curious, is there any difference in the way the Democrats and the Republicans are approaching North Korea?
I think that politicians, as a rule, in Washington, you have to give them a little bit of credit because they don't – like it's easy for the Republicans to be, shaking their fists at like Muslim majority countries, right? Because the Overton window is there. Like that's understood to be appropriate for a Republican audience, and for the Democrats to be more pro-refugee, whatever. North Korea doesn't fit into any of these kind of specific boxes for either party, so they don't really know what to say other than it's terrible, and they kind of keep their mouths shut, which is, I think, great. You notice, like for Obama, North Korea has not been a priority for his entire tenure. And, Bush included North Korea on his axis of evil, of course, but even they tried to make nice with them. And like I said, towards the end of his term, Bush removed them from being a state sponsor of terrorism, which they were in 1987, I believe. North Korea blew up an airliner to spite South Korea for getting the Summer Olympics. And this is all in my book, of course, the whole story there. So this is really a case where, the public politicians kind of shy away and leave it to the people behind the scenes to try to make nice. There's all sorts of back channels going on with North Korea. And again, there's really only so much we can do because the border between North Korea and South Korea, which is ironically called the DMZ, demilitarized zone, is the most militarized zone on Earth. It has, landmines and all sorts of horrors. But it's China that's the ones that have to do something to kind of give them a golden parachute. Here's another thing. If you look at Libya and if you look at Egypt and if you look at Chile, what they tried to do with Pinochet and Slobodan Milosevic, when these regimes fall, the people at the very top are often personally killed. So that's another big problem. Like there's no incentive for Kim Jong-un to take his hand off the trigger because he's going to be shot and with good reason. So this is a very, very big problem. Now, if we put pressure on China, that would help. But I mean, again, what are we going to do with these 24 million people? It's a very tricky situation. However, there have been some positive signs of progress. Because the government has been unable to provide food, there has been a grudging acceptance of black markets throughout North Korea as a mechanism for people to get food and to get rice. Now, once people start relying on markets to get food instead of the government, that is a very important, if not conscious, but subconscious ideological shift from, we're a complete communist statist country to be like, well, markets do provide some value and utility. And that's not a concession that North Korea wanted to make, but it's one that they've had to make.
I seem to recall in one of our earlier conversations, and I hope I'm remembering this right, that it's your opinion that in the world of today, North Korea is the worst regime.
Absolutely.
Is that your opinion?
I think that's kind of undeniably true. I don't know any other country that has concentration camps. I know that Eritrea, which was part of the former Ethiopia, they have less press freedom because they don't have any foreign agents in the whole country, foreign journalists in the whole country. But North Korea, the good part is somewhat good, as good as you can get in that dark nightmare, is that they have started see, there's a lie in the West that North Korea is immutable and hasn't changed, and this is completely false. And here's a good example. North Korean tourism used to be limited to Pyongyang, the capital city, and Kaesong and a few other cities. Now, Pyongyang is the capital. It's the capital, but it's for show. It's their show city. If you're not loyal to the regime, you're not allowed to step foot in Pyongyang. Similarly, if you're disabled, you're not allowed to be in Pyongyang. They exile you the country because everyone in Pyongyang has to look good, right? This is their fascist mentality. Now the tourism has expanded to throughout the whole country. So whereas before in the Northeast, where the most hungry people are and politically unreliable, they were kept isolated from the outside world. Now foreigners are allowed there. This is not through choice. This is like, okay, what do we have to sell, i.e. tourism, that can bring in hard currency, meaning euros, Chinese RMB, or American dollars. So they are experimenting in their own central planning way to try to incentivize foreigners to invest in them so they can get money. So they are, Ayn Rand often said that you can't escape. You can fake reality, but you can't fake the consequences of faking reality. So they are up against it, and it's getting harder and harder for them. And I think it's very much a ticking time bomb.
Well, the reason I posed that particular question is that in yesterday's episode, 569, we talked exclusively about the subject of humanitarian intervention. So military intervention that is not related to the strategic interests of some country, but it's done presumably out of sheer benevolence. So we look at a regime like North Korea, and we can't imagine in this world anyway a worse one. It's the worst one there is. Yeah. Now, obviously, you can't go to war with them, but it seems wouldn't it be tricky for a libertarian to say, and I'm just asking you this as devil's advocate, but
Sure.
that the best possible strategy for dealing with the worst regime in the world is to do nothing? I mean, not even officially try to undermine them in any way, but actually do absolutely nothing. Could that really be the best approach?
I don't think that's the best approach. I think the best approach is there's two things that brought down the Soviet Union, which was economics, but also information. So the Soviet Union kind of collapsed in a very peaceful way. It could have gotten very ugly very easily, right? Gorbachev and many of these leaders at the top realized that there was a moral corruption inherent in it. And an example I always use is, you had Russian women watching American soap operas like Dallas and Dynasty, where the maids are in fur coats, and then they go home and wondering why are they wiping their butts with newspaper, right? It's just as simple as that. And in North Korea, when they're seeing how the rest of the world lives, how if they see tourists who are college kids, and the college kids are wearing just a pair of denim jeans, just crappy jeans, which are still higher quality than anything they've ever seen in their store, because the highest quality products they have are imported from China, which is the kind of things we'd see in like a 99-cent store. It doesn't take much to put two and two together. And it becomes harder and harder for the regime to justify why you're also hungry and starving and can't wear makeup when everyone else on earth, at least has that option. And they've started kind of consumerism a little bit in Pyongyang because there's this whole corrupt elite where the people have money and they want products and they've kind of imported products and started having little kind of shopping malls. And this cynicism, as I think I've said to you before, is very, very healthy because it's very good to be skeptical towards the leaders, Kim Jong-un, the current leader, and be like, this guy's not magic. He's just a fat kid who inherited his dad's, criminal gangster empire. And there are better ways. So there's hope. And I think the hope is, again, through information. And I talked to a refugee, and she made the good point that movie, The Interview, would be good for them to watch. And I was shocked she said this. And her point was they are told that the rest of the world is terrified of North Korea and Kim Jong-un, right? And, they have nukes. We're all quaking in our U.S. imperialist boots. If you watch that movie and where he's treated as a clown, that's indisputable proof that this idea that we're terrified of them is simply false. So the more, the bigger the lie, the easier it is to dismantle in some sense, because it's just like letting some water in through a dam. All of a sudden, everything comes crashing down because the math just doesn't add up.
One other thing I want to ask you, I know about East and West Germany and how they were, as good a controlled experiment as you're going to get in this world, right, about two different social systems. But I know that when it came to Berlin, there was a wall separating the two and you couldn't escape and so on. What is it like? What is the division between North and South Korea like in that regard?
Well, it's very, very tricky. Besides the physical division, DMZ, when Kim Jong Il met with the South Korean president, they could only understand, I think, 90% of what the other said. So the languages started separating. And another thing is when you have North Korean people who escape to the South, they automatically have South Korean citizenship and they're given like welfare for a couple of years. However, they are treated as complete garbage. First of all, they're all shorter, and South Korea is this very kind of hierarchical society. And their accent was regarded as a term I heard when I was reading about it was guttural. And I asked someone from South Korea, I'm like, what's the American analog? And they said, it's like someone from the very deep South. Now, you can imagine how people, from the North, these Northeast snooty jerks, hear someone with a Southern accent and think they're better than them because they're the Northeastern idiocy. Well, it's the same thing in Seoul, right? So Seoul being their kind of capital city, they hear someone with a rural accent, they dismiss them immediately. So these men who have all their lives been told when to report to work, had every minute of their lives accounted for by the North Korean state, given freedom, they don't know really what to do with it. And it's a very, very, very difficult transition for them. So it's very ugly in that regard. However, North Korea has, there's 2 points they make which are very fair. One of which is they weren't enemy combatants in the World War II. So why is it that they were divided just like Germany was? That's not fair. That's a valid point. The second point they make in the literature, which I was shocked, is they go, look, people in the West think it's absurd we can reunify, but they point to the Germany's reunifying 50 years later, and they point to the Irish Accords and how peace was made there. And they said, and the example they always use is, if you're saying the word impossible, you're not speaking the Korean language. So they still very much hope for reunification, but the Southerners don't care about them at all. I met a couple of tourist girls from Seoul, and they knew nothing about North Korea whatsoever. They don't care about them. So it's even more tragic, not from the oppression level also, but in terms of hope for their future. It's very, very, very bad.
Well, I'm sorry to end on such a note, so people should mentally think back to when you were saying that there was indeed hope. And it does seem just so anomalous for there to be this regime in this day and age. I just can't believe that it's actually happening. It's actually part of the world. And
the other thing that I can't believe is how people in the press regard them as a laughingstock. You are laughing at children being starved for political purposes.
Yeah. That's not funny. And it's all, I cannot encourage people enough to read Dear Reader. We're going to link to it at tomwoods.com/570. So if you're driving around and you, for some reason, can't remember the title, Dear Reader, then just remember 570. And we're going to link to it there. And to Michael, of course, whom you should visit at michaelmalice.com, who, as I told you in a previous episode just a couple episodes ago, not only does he know all this, but he also knows more about sea life than you and all your friends put together. So, Michael, as always, it's a great pleasure, and let's look for a reason to talk again soon.
Thanks, Tom.
So subscribe over at tomwoods.com to the show for free, and we'll see you tomorrow with one of our super-duper fun debate analysis episodes. Thanks for listening.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.